faster than a speeding bullet,
I ran until my muscles burned and my veins pumped battery acid.
more powerful than a locomotive.
An idea is like a virus, resilient, highly contagious.
Able to leap tall buildings in a single bound.
Hey guys, Jared Moon here, and welcome to the Better Humanology Podcast. I am super pumped for today's episode. On the show today, we have Greg Everett. He is the founder of CatalystAthletics.com, by far the most comprehensive weightlifting resource on the planet. So definitely check out his website at CatalystAthletics.com. Greg himself, former nationally competitive Olympic weightlifter, and now he coaches some of the top athletes in the world. World-renowned weightlifting coach here, guys. So definitely, pick up everything that you can from him. He is not only an expert in weightlifting, but he's pretty good at becoming a better human being, and that's, of course, why we had him on the show. Now, something you know, if you've been listening to the show for a while, every time I have a guest on, I ask them the question at the very end, what's your best advice for becoming a better human being? Now, this is the question, and I want you to answer that question, so we're doing something new. If you go right now to betterhumanology.com, there's a little form. That's the only thing on the page. I want you to answer that question. It's time for you to step up to the plate, put in your 2 cents. What is your best advice on becoming a better human being? So go to betterhumanology.com, do that right now. All you do is enter your name, your email, and your answer. And we're not doing anything with your name. We're not doing anything with your email other than contacting you and saying, hey, this is a pretty badass answer. Can we use it on the show? Maybe read it out loud, and then you'll give us the thumbs up or the thumbs down. Either way, that's all we're doing, guys. We really want to collect as many data points as we can, and I know that you guys have some pretty badass answers. But after you do that, listen to the show. Here's Greg Everett. All right, Greg, welcome to the Better Humanology Podcast. Super pumped to have you on, man. I've been following your stuff for a long time, and you're a super motivational guy, and Catalyst Athletics is amazing. So welcome to the show.
Thank you very much for having me. Appreciate it.
And everyone knows who listens to the show, I really like to take on a host and co-host type of thing at the beginning, and just ask you, because everyone knows that we dish out some challenges at the beginning of every episode. So do you think you could provide us, we'll start with a fitness challenge. You think you could provide us with a fitness challenge?
Yeah, but the thing is it's not specific. The way I look at this is fitness is very individual, and everybody's got completely different ideas of what's interesting to them, what's meaningful to them. And so to provide an actual specific challenge to me doesn't make a lot of sense. For example, if someone said, well, I want you to do a triathlon, I'd say, no way. That's the least interesting thing I can think of, and it would mean nothing to me to be able to do that. So, really, I think that what you have to do if you're looking for some kind of a challenge for yourself, that's great. It's a good place to start, but it has to align with what you value as an individual. And basically, you need to figure out, what it is ultimately that you desire to achieve with regard to fitness or sport or whatever it is. And if the ultimate goal is not something that's going to be readily attainable right off the bat. I want to be a world champion. Well, you can't say, okay, well, my fitness challenge is to become a world champion in 6 months. But what you can do is, come up with a goal, some kind of, meaningful benchmark along the way, or, in some way create, a point to reach, to challenge yourself to push a little farther in that direction you're already going. And so I know that's a really vague, ambiguous answer, but to me, that's the only one that really makes sense.
And so you're kind of saying, like, just making sure that, you have that goal out there and you're hitting benchmarks to reach that goal. So like an accountability piece in your own realm of fitness or whatever you're doing.
Sure. And, if you want to use the terminology challenge, then, it needs to be, basically pushing yourself just a little farther than you normally would in whatever given period of time. Or, if you have, these certain goals and you find yourself kind of falling behind, you're slipping, your disciplines, waning a little bit, then you set that goalpost a little farther away and give yourself an extra push to kind of reach farther than you have been.
right, man, I appreciate that. And how about a mental toughness challenge?
This one's tough for me too, because I guess my brain doesn't really work with these kind of processes. So, really what I would say is trying to take, maybe a week and the goal being to basically ignore any kind of negativity, not only from other people around you, but cutting off any negative thinking of your own immediately. And, this includes kind of disparaging yourself over something you've done or haven't done, not arguing with people, especially don't argue online. It's just embarrassing for everybody and you accomplish absolutely nothing.
Right.
Except just saddling yourself with guilt and embarrassment. And I think the big one is not allowing what anyone else is saying or doing to influence your mindset or your mood, and kind of learning that the world can go on around you without necessarily affecting what you're doing, how you're doing it, and how you feel about it. In other words, I can put out all these articles and videos and whatever, and know for a fact, because I hear from people that it's helpful, and I'm doing, I'm helping a lot of people get better and all these things. And then, you always get the few negative comments, this is stupid, you're an idiot, whatever. And, I think one of the big mistakes people make, on whatever scale this occurs in their own lives, is allowing those negative things to really have far more of an effect than all the positive things. So, you've got tens of thousands of people who are learning and getting something from what you're doing. And then, two guys over in the corner who just hate everything. And you're allowing those two people to upset you. And so I think that's been one of the biggest challenges for myself is learning how to, kind of stay the course and not allow those things to influence what I'm doing or how I'm doing it, or to negatively affect, the mindset and the motivation that I have. So I think setting a small enough period of time where it's reasonable, a week, I'd say is pretty good. But even if you have to start with a single day, it's better than nothing.
I think that's awesome. That really resonates with me. Running a site online where a lot of my traffic comes from DIY garage gym equipment, and people just want to rip you apart for your projects. I definitely it used to bother me a ton when people would do that, and because I knew I was helping other people, but still, right. That's a great one, and it really resonates with me. But book recommendation.
I'm so bad at doing these things because on the one hand I read a lot. Like I always read 2 books at a time. I always have a more of an informational book and then more of an entertainment book. So I'll start with the informational book first, then I'll finish with the entertainment book each night, whatever. And but when people ask me book recommendations, I just draw a blank. And so I figured I'd try to go a different way with this and recommend, just because it's been on my mind lately, and I don't know why exactly, but The Great Gatsby. And I think it kind of aligns with what I said previously about the mental toughness challenge. And, a lot of people listening probably aren't into literature of any kind necessarily, but that book to me, I don't know how many times I've read it throughout the years, but I was an English major in college, so we read these books a million times. But it's really about, not allowing elements of your past to dictate your future and the decisions you make about what you're doing, not making the mistake of believing that you're moving forward when actually you're facing backward and chasing things that you'll never be able to retrieve, and kind of disguising them as new goals and new ambitions and things like that. And so it's a really long, complicated way of making that point, I suppose you could say. But I always really liked that book.
I think that's a great recommendation. It's been a while since I read it, but I might throw it back into the queue.
And if you're going to watch the movie, don't watch the new one. I had to turn it off after 5 minutes. It was so awful. Watch the Sam Waterston and Robert Redford one.
Okay. All right, man. Well, I really appreciate you throwing out the challenges this week in the book recommendation. Do appreciate that. So how about you give us just a quick background for the listeners, anyone who may not know your background in weightlifting or what you're doing today and all that.
Oh, geez. Well, I own Catalyst Athletics, which I guess you would call it a publishing company. Primarily, we do obviously a lot of online content, from articles to videos to, exercise demo libraries, things like that. We publish books, both by me and a number of other coaches. And then we're also a competitive weightlifting team, or a national championship team. We've got, among our lifters, dozens of national level medals. We've got, international team lifters, American record holders. So we're a pretty successful team. I coach that primarily. And then my wife, Amy, coaches Jess Lucero, who's one of our best lifters. And then two more of our newer lifters are coached by a good friend of mine, Mike Gray, down in San Diego. And so primarily what I do is coach and then create educational content for other people and put that online so we can get it to as many people as possible. And I've been doing that for over 10 years now with Catalyst Athletics specifically. We've been in the gym business for almost 15 years, although we actually just closed down our commercial gym and relocated to Oregon. And the gym we have now is strictly for our competitors. We don't do classes or private training or anything like that. That's about it. That's what I'm up to.
Cool, man. And yeah, I highly recommend your site. I mean, it's like the encyclopedia for Olympic weightlifting. I think it's amazing. And so it's jam-packed full of content, and all the videos are amazing and detailed, and it's really good stuff. Thank you. All right, man. So, you work with some really high-level athletes, and you're a high-level coach. And I just want to know. I really want to start off by asking you, what's the kind of the. Well, I'll stop back. So you're a driven individual. Let's put it that way, and you work with driven individuals. What do you think can add to that drive? Like, what makes someone want to sharpen the axe? And if you can't answer that question for your athletes, maybe answer it for yourself. What makes you want to constantly get better and improve?
Well, the facetious answer is like self-loathing. Like, you just never good enough and you want to be better. And I think that there's probably at least a small element of that in everybody who's that driven. You see a lot of times athletes in particular who end up becoming truly great. They tend to come from backgrounds in which they were neglected and mistreated and felt to feel worthless. And so basically their whole athletic career is just proving people wrong and proving to themselves that they're not all those horrible things that, they've been made to believe their whole lives. So I do think there's a big part of that for many people. And I think that, certain people are just by nature interested in self-improvement, and interested, I shouldn't just say interested, but almost obsessed with it to a point where, they're willing to shape their entire lives around improving themselves either in one specific way or kind of across the board. And athletics is just, one really obvious way to do that. And so I think it draws a lot of people with that kind of personality. As far as what you can do to improve that in someone, I think a large part of coaching is providing, accountability, providing, what goes overlooked a lot is the emotional side of things, that emotional support, that, basically providing an athlete someone that they want to make proud, someone that they want to impress, other than this just kind of general idea of I'm going to prove the world wrong. I'm not a loser or whatever. And that, with certain athletes, that is, I would say, far more important than technique, than program design, any of that stuff. That can be the absolute, deal maker over everything else. And Jess Lucero is a perfect example of that. Not to say that Amy's programming for her isn't great, but what really made the difference in her career was having somebody who saw her true potential and said, hey, you can be this great lifter, and really took her under her wing and provided that security and that support that she hadn't had previously. And then all of a sudden she just really took off, and now she owns every American record, more than once over, and has become, objectively the best 58 kilo lifter the U.S. has ever had. So I do think that is, the combination of a coach and a team, and having that environment where the expectations are very high, the standards are very high, and so it's not. The individual doesn't have to be entirely self-motivated. They don't have to be entirely accountable to themselves. They have to live up to the expectations of the people around them. And that all really contributes to everybody's increased success. And so I think that's why, even though it's an individual sport, why that team environment is so helpful for weightlifting.
And you refer obviously to all of them as athletes, but I read an article on your website, because they are athletes, but you differentiated an athlete versus an exerciser. And I really love that article. A lot of it resonates with me and how I feel about taking things seriously. But do you think that you could maybe touch on that? Maybe your opinion on being an athlete versus an exerciser, and if you're working with an exerciser, maybe how to get them to move the needle a little bit closer to the athlete side.
Yeah, that article got some people a little upset. They took it as an insult, but it really wasn't intended that way. And, the whole purpose was, to point out the fact that it's important to align your training and your expectations with your goals. And, to me, there's nothing offensive or insulting about that. And so I think, number one, the athlete's motivations, basically the goals are all about that athletic achievement. The rest of the life is built around that, versus an exerciser is, someone who, they like to train. Maybe they don't even like to train, but they feel like they have to do it. And so, they have their lives, and then they kind of try to work in this training here and there where they can, where it's convenient. And so it's a completely different mindset. And so what brought it up is kind of the CrossFit phenomenon. It's not just CrossFit now. It's this mindset is kind of finding itself popping up in a lot of different areas in training and exercise. Is this just like overdoing it to the point of injury and detriment to health, where there really is no true goal. There's really no point to it outside of itself. And of course, there's nothing wrong with enjoying exercising for its own sake. That's fantastic. I personally like training for its own sake. But when you have, say, like a 45-year-old who's been sedentary most of his or her life, who just got into CrossFit or whatever training, and now all of a sudden, they're pushing to the point where they're getting shoulder surgeries or back surgeries and things like that. And, there's no clear purpose to what they're doing. It's bizarre to me. And I suppose, the real point is, if you want to enjoy training, if you want to enjoy exercising, you should probably do it in a way that allows you to continue doing it for as long as possible. In other words, don't keep hurting yourself. Because, the more frequently you do that, the more seriously you do that, the more times you do it, the less you're going to be able to do the thing that you enjoy doing. As far as getting people who are kind of on the exerciser side of the spectrum going more towards the athlete side. I don't know that really needs to be done. And I think that, people want to do what they want to do. And number one, they have to figure out what that is because they don't always know. So the job of a trainer or a coach or a friend or whoever is to, help a person determine what it is they actually want to do. Do you want to just exercise for fun because you like it? Fine, let's do that. Let's figure out a good way to do that. Do you want to be a competitive athlete? Okay, well, you need to change the way you're doing X, Y, and Z, and you need to get more motivated. And so if someone is an exerciser but really wants to be an athlete, then you may have to kind of guide them and push them in that direction. But at the same time, I do feel that so much of that motivation and that ambition is intrinsic, and it's not something that you can get from someone else. If you're not motivated to be a great athlete or be particularly athletic, no amount of coercing or persuasion or motivating from a coach or a trainer is really going to change your mind about that. It's just not something you're interested in. I could have someone talk to me all day about how great tennis is, and I just don't care. Like, I respect tennis players, but I couldn't be less interested. And so that's the way I look at it is you like what you like. And I don't really see a particular need to try to change that. There's nothing wrong with being an exerciser, unless it's to the point where someone is very unhealthy and needs to change and make some lifestyle changes. I guess that's a little different. But again, that's not really pushing them to be an athlete so much. It's just pushing them to kind of reevaluate their lifestyles and not die unnecessarily young.
Yeah, to take it just a little bit more seriously than they are now.
Right.
A big part of what I do is provide programming for we call them garage gym athletes, people all around the world who are in their garages doing their own training. And I do a lot of the programming for these guys and girls. And one of the common problems, and I think that it's very difficult, and oftentimes I send them to your website because online coaching. I mean, I'm sure that I don't know if you do a ton of it, but it has its own challenges. That's why I primarily call myself a programmer as opposed to a coach most of the time, because I'm providing a program, and I think that's very different from what a coach does. But if someone is working out in their garage alone and they want to do Olympic weightlifting, because the popularity has exploded in recent years, so I get that question all the time. Where should I start? What should I do? How should I practice? What do you think a good starting point for someone in the garage is who wants to learn Olympic weightlifting?
Well, this is going to sound completely advertorial, but I mean, my book and videos that's exactly what their purpose is. So the whole point of that book was to provide a single cohesive resource for a person to learn how to lift, to learn how to train, to prepare for competition, all those things, versus having to, hunt around for each little individual piece of information and try to cobble this all together, which was really what you had to do, 10 years ago. If you weren't fortunate enough to live in, one of the dozen places in the country that had a good weightlifting coach locally. And so the reason I think that is kind of the better way to go than say, I'm just going to get on YouTube and kind of watch videos and learn, is because, again, you get too many different approaches. You get all this, sometimes contradictory advice, and at the very least different advice, and it gets very confusing for a new lifter who doesn't have the experience and that frame of reference to kind of evaluate that information and say, well, this makes no sense, I'm going to ignore that, or this does align with what I know, so I'll continue with that. So my book, and then using the catalystathletics.com, all the free resources there, tons of video, all the exercise demos, articles that will address, specific issues that you may have, all that kind of stuff. That's the primary purpose of what we do. And, the secondary purpose is to kind of educate coaches, But really it's to just make the sport and the movements as accessible as possible to as many people as possible.
Yeah, and I think that you've done a really good job on that. And like I said, I do recommend your site all the time if someone is looking to pursue weightlifting more seriously, because we don't do a ton of weightlifting when I program. It's just more strength and conditioning. But I do want to talk to you a little bit more about maybe what you've seen on your side, because, I mean, you've been into weightlifting for a long time, and I really feel like CrossFit may have been responsible. I can't put a finger on it. Maybe you're a little more knowledgeable, but what has this surge of weightlifting, where do you think it came from?
I think CrossFit's popularity has played some part in it, although I think it's often exaggerated or kind of misrepresented in a lot of cases. And so, people will say, well, the membership numbers of USA Weightlifting have increased quite a bit, and that is true. But what they fail to recognize is that the primary increase in membership is with, coaches, like people will get their level 1 certification. And so you have a lot of, CrossFit trainers who get the USA Weightlifting certification to have it, but don't coach competitive weightlifters. So that's kind of, it like inflates the numbers to some extent. Now we have had a lot more athletes come into the sport. I won't deny that. But what's changed, I think, primarily is that the athletes who are coming in now, there's much more turnover. In other words, years ago there were fewer total people, but you tended to have people who stayed in the sport for many years. They were kind of lifers. Now you have more people who are kind of, putting their toe in the water and maybe doing a couple meets for a year or two and then get bored with it and move on. And there's not anything necessarily wrong with that, but one of the issues that a lot of people in the weightlifting community take offense to is this idea that CrossFit saved this dying sport, and it's just not true. And there have been a couple high-level lifters who have come from CrossFit, but they're the minority, and again, they don't tend to last. And so, to say that CrossFit somehow saved the sport is silly. And I think what happened too is that the whole CrossFit thing coincided with the explosion of social media and the general accessibility of weightlifting online. And not to take more credit than is due necessarily, but we were one of the people out front, really providing all this information online and giving people, access to this stuff. And so I think that weightlifting is an inherently interesting sport. It's not like CrossFit took something that was horrible and everyone hated and made them like it. It just exposed people to a sport that they naturally, ended up having an affinity for. And then, you have the social media kind of explosion on top of that. So you just have more and more people being able to see weightlifters, see the lifts, say, hey, what's that? That's interesting. I want to do that. And so I think it's all very much interwoven, and you can't really give the credit strictly to CrossFit. Although, without question, the whole CrossFit thing has provided a lot more places for people to train, with appropriate equipment. It has made weightlifting equipment a lot more accessible and affordable. It used to be that there were a couple manufacturers of, weightlifting equipment, and it was really expensive because it was hard to get. It was imported, or the stuff made in the US was just garbage. And so now you have options, and, people, even, 5-6 years ago, you couldn't buy jerk blocks or pulling blocks. You had to build them. Now you have, more than one company you can buy that stuff from. So that's a perfect example of something that went from being totally obscure to being pretty readily accessible and affordable, because of the numbers of people getting involved. So I don't want to disparage CrossFit. That wasn't my intention there, but I do think it's interesting to see how much additional credit is often taken by certain people that's really not due.
Yeah, that's kind of what I wanted to get your perspective, because you are very much on the weightlifting side, and I know there's always like I've heard that, yeah, CrossFit, you know, like really exploded weightlifting. And that's why I kind of want to ask you. I was like, well, is that really true? Like I wanted to get your opinion on it.
And the thing too is that people tend to forget that I was on the CrossFit side too. I owned the 4th CrossFit affiliate with Rob Wolf, starting back in 2003. So I was very much on the inside watching that whole transition. CrossFit going from this tiny little thing, where there was a few hardcore people who, were trying out affiliating with CrossFit, having these gyms and basically begging people to train. Because no one knew what CrossFit was and they all thought it was stupid. And so watching that whole thing, I've gotten to watch CrossFit and weightlifting grow kind of in parallel this whole time. So I think I have a pretty good perspective on the relationship between the two.
And that makes me kind of curious. I'm a big fan of, Louis Simmons, the world-renowned, powerlifting coach in Ohio. And he always talks about his powerlifters being able to, they need to survive the training. So they do a lot of conditioning with sleds and whatnot. And now on your side, you're world-renowned weightlifting coach. What do you do? Do you like for conditioning? Because they obviously don't need like this CrossFit Games level of conditioning, but they need some conditioning to withstand the training. What kind of conditioning do you normally put your athletes through?
Well, the problem with the word conditioning is that it means something different to everybody you say it to. You say conditioning to a boxer and they're talking about road work and running miles and miles and miles. You talk about conditioning to a power lifter and, they're holding kettlebells and walking on a big piece of foam and pulling sleds and doing weird stuff like that. You talk about conditioning to a weightlifter, and typically what you're going to hear is, early on in a training cycle, you're going to have a period of time where you're doing pretty high volume, high reps, you're doing complexes, things like that. You're doing additional kind of, I guess you could call it bodybuilding work. That's really your conditioning. You're not doing cardiovascular work. You're not really doing, local muscular endurance work in the traditional sense. You're conditioning your body to be able to withstand volume and intensity by doing a bunch of volume and then gradually shifting into, higher intensity and more specificity as you go. And so the whole, you need to have this cardiovascular conditioning to withstand the stuff I would argue is untrue. And if you have, if you're training in what I would consider the traditional manner, like I'm describing as a weightlifter, you actually do have a decent cardiovascular capacity. It's you're not going to end up with these total fat slugs that people imagine, like, oh my God, they lift one time and then sit down and eat a pizza and drink beer. Yeah, that's just nonsense. Of course, those people do exist, but I think by and large, the weightlifters you're going to encounter at a high level are very athletic people in a number of different ways. They just choose to, focus on one very specific thing. And you look at powerlifting, and it's a completely different sport. And it's not even necessarily an issue of what's necessary and beneficial. It's also an issue of what's possible with the drug use that's involved. You can do a lot more. You can do a whole bunch of conditioning and bodybuilding type work in addition to your more specific core training when you're on drugs. And I mean, I hate to be the guy who's a dick about it and points that out, but it's kind of a necessary thing for people to understand because, the people who are actually doing it are not going to admit it, and they're going to pretend that you're just not training hard enough or you're just kind of a baby, which is kind of silly.
Yeah, and I think drugs, that's kind of that's popped up everywhere, like in every sport. I think the only sport that I'm not saying it's not happening, but hasn't been revealed in a major way yet is CrossFit. But yeah. I'm saying been revealed yet.
Yeah,
yeah. I'm sure it's only a matter of time. But But I kind of want to shift gears
Well,
here.
but it won't be, though, because it's not in CrossFit's best interest to actually legitimately drug
Right.
test.
Yeah,
That's the worst possible thing they could do for themselves. So it's never going to be exposed in any major way. It's always going to be known by people who know those things. And then, unfortunately, the vast majority of people watching are just going to assume like, oh, wow, CrossFit's neuroendocrine response is incredibly intense.
Right. Well, that's because it's completely in-house competition, right? Put on by that company. And then in weightlifting, you have countries, fighting against each other. And I think that it's,
Right.
there's a little bit more at stake. And different governing body, should I say.
Well, and theoretically, it's not a for-profit sport where CrossFit is.
Yeah.
And so it's not to say there's plenty of corruption and things in weightlifting, as we've really seen exposed in the last year. But there is an actual honest effort on many parts or many people's part within the kind of the global community, despite the fact that many participants are actively trying to cover it up.
All right, I'm gonna shift gears on you here real quick. I got two different questions. I'll just go one at a time here. But you're a pretty successful dude. I mean, you're a successful coach. You have successful business. And I know it's been a journey. You said you've been into it, 15 years, the gym business at least. So, what do you think one of the biggest obstacles you've had in your journey, to achieving your level of success, and how you overcame it?
Well, I think especially the first many years is that it was really hard to afford to be able to do this. I think people still to this day kind of have this idea of Catalyst Athletics as some giant, corporate entity where we've got, 40 employees and, we've got big warehouse and all this stuff. And it's really me. And, my wife does a little bit. And then, I've got one other person who handles email and some orders and stuff like that. And that's pretty much the whole operation. Now that the gym is closed and, when we had the gym, it was just people working at the gym. And so, especially early on, there was zero money in this. The market didn't exist. It wasn't anything like today. CrossFit kind of led the way where, people could make money off that. And then slowly weightlifting emerged as a kind of a sub market where, a few people here and there could make some money, but still not a ton. And so, early on having to, produce products and media and that sort of thing, you can't afford to actually hire professionals to do that. So I had to do it all myself. And so that was really how I was kind of able to get out ahead of everybody else, I think, is number one. I just got into it very early. And so I had a head start. But then two, I didn't have to wait around to actually get money in order to, build a great website and to, produce video and get books laid out and printed, because I was able to do it all myself. And so that's, for me, Catalyst Athletics is very personal. Literally and metaphorically, it's, I don't want it to be a big business. I want it to be my thing, that I do and I am responsible for. And I think that is why, it's kind of been successful, is because it reflects 100% on me, and it's my reputation and my name attached to it. And so I'm very, very intent on making sure that what I put out is legitimate and helpful and of as much value as possible, because I don't want to look like an idiot.
Yeah, I fully get that. As someone who runs a website, I fully understand that. So do you have kids?
I do. I have a 15-year-old daughter.
Okay. I like to ask this question to guests occasionally, and the ones who have kids, I think, take it a little bit more seriously. I have two boys myself. So say there's a nationwide curriculum implemented in the United States, and the president calls you up and says you're responsible for one chapter of the book. So every single child in America they have to read your chapter, they're going to be tested on it, and they have to pass it before they're allowed to even graduate high school, not optional. What would your chapter be about?
Oh man. It would probably be about personal responsibility and work ethic and entitlement and not being a little brat who thinks the world owes you something.
Yeah,
it would be more eloquent than that, but that would be the gist.
I would read that chapter for sure. What do you think? Just parent to parent, what do you think are? I mean, my boys are young. Your daughter's a little further on. What do you think some good tips or strategies are for trying to? It's something I'm honestly worried about at times is like making sure they don't grow up with an entitlement mentality, but without being like a huge dick to them. Right. Like snatching things out of their hand, and so it's a balance. What do you have in that regard?
Yeah, I would agree that's probably the hardest thing to do. And so I'm just very conscious of trying to create an environment where, our daughter knows that we have expectations of her and that she actually needs to earn things. And knowing that we will ultimately provide what she needs. She's not going to go hungry or, be walking 20 miles to school and things like that. But that it's not just a given. She can't take it for granted. She has to actually develop that mindset where, okay, if I want X, I have to actually do Y. I have to work my way towards things and earn things. And so, this is simple stuff that goes back for probably as long as parents have existed, having chores, learning that idea of working. And, as soon as she's able to, which is actually really soon, she's going to have a job, even if it's very part-time, really learning the value of money, because kids just don't get it unless a kid grows up in legitimate poverty. I think they really don't understand what money means and the value of money. And they just kind of see it as this thing, their parents have. And, oh, hey, I need to buy this. Oh, cool. There's money right here. And so learning like, wow, I had to work 18 hours in order to buy this one thing, and seeing how, their actual work translates into the ability to buy things and do things that they want versus snapping their fingers and, having things appear, which really is the prevailing mindset. And it's not even just kids, it's among adults. I mean, my age in their 30s, which is really pathetic and embarrassing. People believing that they're owed a job, even if they don't work hard, and they're on their phones all day long looking at Facebook and then wondering why their bosses are pissed off and want to fire them and then suing the company for getting fired. And that's like my biggest nightmare, is having my daughter grow up like that and just being, oh my God, I'm such a failure as a parent, because that's the worst kind of person on earth. And I don't want to be responsible for producing one of those. And so, yeah, it's hard. And I think it's the combination of a lot of little things and just being very cognizant of, how your kid is behaving day to day, and, are they respectful to other people? Are they saying their pleases and thank yous? And as silly as that stuff sounds, I think it's so incredibly important, because all those little tiny details are what add up over time, to create the ultimate character of a person. And so it's kind of just trying as much as possible to be conscious of that stuff and kind of monitor it and, have the reminders, like you said, not being a dick, but like, hey, you need to go do this. Why didn't you say thank you to that person? Whatever the case is, and just kind of staying on them and making sure that they always understand that those things are important. It's not just some thing that doesn't really matter. Like, oh, well, people don't say please anymore, and they don't say yes, sir, yes, ma'am, Mr. and Mrs. That's just stupid. And it's like, no, that's important stuff as far as I'm concerned.
No, yeah, I agree with you. I think, my brother and I have this conversation. I ask my dad all the time, because I am raising two boys. I'm like, because my brother and I, we're both, fairly confident guys. We think that we can achieve whatever we want to achieve, but we don't think that we deserve any of it. Like we're not owed that.
Right.
And so, I always ask my dad, like, how do I like replicate, that to some degree, because, I like you, like, I just, the worst person is that entitled, like, I deserve all this crap. And I think he gave a similar answer. It's like, we had to say sir. Like, if we didn't say sir, it was a big deal. Like,
Yeah.
He said all the little things he thinks equates to that. So that really resonates with me. All right, man. I got to get your answers to these questions. This quickfire question, then the ultimate question of the show. Very interested to hear what you have here. So you ready for the quickfire questions?
Sure.
All right, man. What's the hardest workout you've ever done?
Nothing specific, but usually it's, the 2 to 3 weeks out from, a competition where you're doing, in a single workout, you're doing snatch and clean and jerk, working up to a heavy single and then doing multiple waves, working back up to heavy singles, and then probably doing some heavy squats and pulls with that. That's physically challenging, but mentally very challenging too, to be able to kind of stay focused and stay motivated as you just get ground down to a pulp.
All right. And in your opinion, what's the best activity for building mental toughness?
This might sound repetitive from earlier in the show, but I think always practicing, not allowing other people to influence your state of mind, learning to shut out those kind of things as meaningless distractions and remain focused on what you're doing and, what you need to do and how you need to do it.
All right, man. I love that one. So if you could have only one piece of equipment to train with for the rest of your life, what would it be?
That's a barbell. And if you disagree with me, you're wrong.
Right. All right. This is the question, the most important question of the show. What's the best advice you have for becoming a better human? And it's 100% open-ended here.
Well, this pretty much goes just back to what I was saying earlier. Listen more than you talk. Understand that no one owes you anything. Respect people until they prove they don't deserve it. And hard work is usually the best solution for just about any problem.
I love that. All right, man. Well, I want to make sure that people have the opportunity. We've mentioned a few times, but where can people learn more about you, what you're doing, and get involved with your programs and videos and whatnot?
CatalystAthletics.com is kind of the main spot to go. That's got all the articles, videos, all of our products that, for purchase, along with all the free stuff. And then that, of course, will connect you to things like the Performance Menu Journal that we've been publishing for, I think this is like 12 years now. AmericanWeightliftingFilm.com. It'll get you there so you can get the weightlifting documentary we put out a couple years ago. All that stuff. And then, of course, that has connections to our social media, Instagram and Facebook and Twitter and all that stuff, which we try to post actual instructional, helpful content, not just butt pictures.
Perfect. And I'll make sure I link to all that stuff. Especially, I really want to watch, I think I'm going to watch it this weekend, the documentary. I'm really interested in that. You put that together? Did you said, because, you were talking about earlier having to do a lot of this stuff yourself. Did you hire like a small crew and just like knew what you wanted to record, or did you like? Nope,
100% done myself.
Oh, that's awesome. I'm definitely going to watch it now. I think it's going to be awesome. I'm super amped about just everything you've done. I'm really impressed by all of it, man.
Thank you.
Everyone, I highly recommend you go check out Catalyst Athletics. If you're listening to this, you can go to the show notes, and I will make sure I have a link to all of his social profiles, his website, and that documentary that we just mentioned, so you guys can check it out. Thank you so much for being on the show, Greg.
Thank you for having me. Appreciate it.
your best. Losers always whine about their best.